Good morning, it's just gone 5 a.m. and I'm about to head out onto the lake on my paddleboard to try and bring you another Swallows and Amazons special. You may have already seen my video last year in which I sailed sea bear down from the northern end of Coniston Water to Peel Island. In this one, I want to show you the southern end. If you want to see the real places which might have found their ways into the books, or just feel like you are really in Swallows and Amazons country, then there is nowhere better than the southern half of Coniston Water. I hope you're going to stay with me and find out why. In my first video, most of the places we saw were places which Arthur Ransome got to know best as an adult. But in the southern half of Coniston Water, we're going to go further back in time, because the southern end of Coniston is where Arthur Ransome spent his childhood summer holidays. If you have a copy of Swallows and Amazons, then you may have seen inside it an author's note which Arthur Ransome wrote in 1958, explaining how those childhood summer holidays provided the original inspiration for his Swallows and Amazons books. I have often been asked how I came to write Swallows and Amazons. The answer is that it had its beginning long, long ago, when, as children, my brother, my sisters and I spent most of our holidays on a farm at the south end of Coniston. We played in or on the lake or on the hills above it, finding friends in the farmers and shepherds and charcoal burners whose smoke rose from the coppice woods along the shore. We adored the place. Coming to it, we used to run down to the lake, dip our hands in and wish as if we had just seen the new moon. Going away from it, we were half drowned in tears. While away from it, as children and as grown-ups, we dreamt about it. No matter where I was, wandering about the world, I used at night to look for the North Star and, in my mind's eye, could see the beloved skyline of great hills beneath it. Swallows and Amazons grew out of those old memories. I could not help writing it. It almost wrote itself. It's a very beautiful, romantic even, bit of writing, but of course it doesn't tell the whole story. And I can imagine that when it was written, some of his fans might have been a little bit disappointed that he hadn't taken this opportunity to shed a little bit more light on some other questions which they've been plaguing him with almost since the beginning. Questions like, are the places where the Swallows and Amazons have their adventures real? Where are they? Can we visit them? For those questions, Arthur Ransome had developed something of a standard reply, which he would trot out on occasions whenever it was called for, such as in replies to fan mail, or in this example, which is from an article he wrote for a children's magazine called Junior Bookshelf in 1937. The country is the country of my own childhood. For quite practical reasons, the place had to be disguised. So the Swallows and the Amazons had a country of their own. Their lake is not altogether Windermere, though Rio is, of course, Bowness, because I had to take a great deal from Coniston. No island on Windermere had quite such a good harbour as that among the rocks where I first landed from a little boat I hardly like to say how many years ago. And a good many people have spotted that Kanchenjunga is the old man. But Cormorant Island is Silverholme on Windermere, and until a year or two ago the cormorants were there. Then, too, there has to be a little pulling about of rivers and roads, but every single place in those books exists somewhere, and by now I know the geography of the country in my books so well that when I walk about in actual fact, sometimes it seems to me that some giant or earthquake has been doing a little scene shifting overnight. Every single place exists somewhere. That's the key phrase, and Arthur Ransome must have known that in writing that he was setting a challenge which his readers would be unable to resist. And for decades now, almost a century even, generations of Arthur Ransome fans have been covering miles of lake, river, woodland and fellside in the hope of trying to find those places. Some have even written and published books about their searches. So have all the places been found? Well, the short answer is no. Many suggestions have been put forward, but very few are convincing enough to satisfy everybody. So the search continues. When I was 12, I had the great good fortune to meet one of the founding members of the Arthur Ransome Society, a man called Dave Stewart, and he took me, along with a bunch of some other young Arthur Ransome enthusiasts, to see some of the places that have been found already. In the last few years, coming back here again with my family, I found myself drawn back onto the Arthur Ransome detective trail, trying to re-find some of the old places, track down some of the new ones that have been added in the intervening years, and who knows, maybe even make some of our own discoveries. As seems fitting for a man who was thought by some to have possibly been a secret agent, the trail is one of disguises, red herrings, and possibly even coded messages. So what are the clues? Well, there are the books themselves, and the illustrations, plus piles and piles of other paperwork which some of the more dedicated Arthur Ransome detectives have spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours sifting through. His letters, diaries, notebooks and sketches, trying to find anything that might give a little bit of a hint as to what is where. Plus, of course, there's the fact that Arthur Ransome himself gave away some of the places by name, although those were places that really he hadn't bothered to hide at all, and his narrowing down of the search area to around Coniston and Windermere. That, though, still is quite a large search area, so if you can only come to one place in search of Swallowdale and Amazon's locations, then the southern end of Coniston Water, for me, really is it. It is the real heart, I think, of Swallowdale and Amazon's country. Our first proper stop is going to be the very southern end of Coniston Water, but it's just impossible to paddle past Peel Island without saying something about it. Just there behind me are the rocks of the Secret Harbour, the crown jewel of Swallowdale and Amazon's locations. It is one of that small handful of places that Arthur Ransome was happy to give away by name, but I think it is far more special than any of the others. In those other places, the real and the fictional worlds seem to merge in some way, but right there in the Secret Harbour, it is just pure Swallowdale and Amazon's. Of all the places in the books that you might want to visit in real life, I think the Secret Harbour would probably be top of most people's lists. And there it is in real life, almost perfect in every way. The other places we're going to see today are going to require a bit more effort from our imaginations. So here we are at the very southern end of Coniston Water. Just over there behind me, the lake flows out into the River Crake, and just over here is the lovely little hamlet of Nibthwaite. Swainson's farm is out of view, but it's one of the furthest buildings, nestled right in against the lower slopes of Brock Barrow. And just here, I hope you can see it, is the little stone harbour where Arthur Ransome used to come at the start of his summer holidays to greet the lake by dipping his hands into the water. There's another little description of that moment in his autobiography. I used first of all to race down to the lake, to the old stone harbour, where the Swainson's boat, our boat, was pulled up halfway out of the shallow, clear water, which always seemed alive with minnows. I had a private right to perform. Without letting the others know what I was doing, I had to dip my hand in the water as a greeting to the beloved lake, or as proof to myself that I had indeed come home. You may have noticed a subtle difference between that description and the one which I read out earlier from the author's note. In that author's note, he described his brother and sisters as being involved in the hand dipping, but in his autobiography there, it was a private ritual. Of course, there is one simple explanation. He might have been thinking of two different summers. Maybe as his brother and sisters got older, he decided to let them join in with his hand dipping. But another explanation is it's all part of an attempt by Arthur Ransome just to change the narrative slightly on how Swallows and Amazons came to be written, trying to put a bit more distance between his fictional swallows and the real Altunian children who gave most of the swallows their names. I won't go now into his possible reasons for doing that. This video is supposed to be about locations rather than people, but from our point of view as detectives, it is worth bearing in mind that when it comes to the story of how Swallows and Amazons was written, not even Arthur Ransome himself can always be considered as a 100% reliable narrator. Anyway, back to the locations, and just there we have a boathouse. There must be dozens of boathouses around Coniston and Windermere that would make pretty decent Amazon boathouses, but I think that one there is the one that has the best claim. One large reason is the strength that it shares with all the locations we'll see today, the fact that it is here, very, very close to Swainson's farm where Arthur Ransome stayed as a boy, and therefore somewhere that he would have known and loved very well indeed. It is the boathouse where the Swainsons kept their rowing boat, which the Ransome family would use to row up the lake for picnics on in various bays, or maybe even up to Peel Island itself. It is also quite well located in the sense that it is not quite on the river, but very, very close to the River Crake, and the River Crake does make a pretty good Amazon river. It is the most navigable, I think, of all the rivers that flow in or out of Coniston Water. It is quite gently flowing. It has reeds all round its entrance, which would be plenty of cover for hiding a sailing dinghy, if you had the inclination to do so, as of course the Amazons often did. And if you do navigate a little way up the River Crake, before long you come to Allen Tarn, a beautiful circular tarn with octopuses around the, not octopuses, water lilies around the edges, which of course makes it a very, very good octopus lagoon. In fact, there is, I don't think anywhere else that's really in the running as a potential octopus lagoon. Of course, all these places all these things are completely the wrong area. They should all be right up at the northern end of the lake, roughly where Coniston village is, in the shadow of Kanchenjunga. But in all other ways, the case seems pretty strong. So I think what we have here is an example of Arthur Ransome using one of those earthquakes to lift up a chunk of landscape, tweak it a bit, and then reinstall it somewhere completely different. Things are going to get a bit more complicated than that before we're done. There is one more reason to think of this boathouse as the Amazon boathouse, although that has to do with its more recent history since Swallows and Amazons was written, and that is that this boathouse is where the dinghy Mavis, on which Amazon was based, was kept by the Altunian family for decades, right up into the 1980s, I think. So for a very long time, this was really quite literally the Amazon boathouse. So here is the mouth of the River Crake. And before we start paddling north again, I just wanted to tell you about one more reason to think of this southern area of Coniston Water as being the hotspot for Swallows and Amazons locations, and that is the illustrations of Clifford Webb. Of course, the illustrations that we're most familiar with now are Arthur Ransome's own illustrations, but he didn't initially intend to be his own illustrator. The first man to be given the task of illustrating Swallows and Amazons was an artist called Stephen Spurrier, but unfortunately Arthur Ransome was so unimpressed with his efforts that Swallows and Amazons was first published with no illustrations at all. Only Stephen Spurrier's maps were allowed to be included, and they can still be found in some editions of Swallows and Amazons today. Clifford Webb was the first successful illustrator of Swallows and Amazons, and in 1931, in the spring of 1931, he visited the Lake District twice to scout out locations, first for Swallows and Amazons, and then on the second visit for Swallowdale, which Arthur Ransome was in the middle of writing at that time. On both occasions, Arthur Ransome brought him here to Nibthwaite, and I think you can clearly see the influence of this area in many of Clifford Webb's illustrations. Here is his illustration of the Amazon River on the night when the swallows rowed up it in the hope of finding the Amazon unguarded. And here is the real River Crake. You can make up your own mind. Starting to paddle north again, up the lake, towards the first of 3 horseshoe coves we'll visit today, There is a moment when, as you round this promontory on the right-hand side, the rest of the lake, including Peel Island, is suddenly and dramatically revealed. I can imagine the young Arthur Ransome in a rowing boat with his family, experiencing this sudden reveal and getting a thrill of excitement and a call to adventure not unlike what the Swallows experienced on their first sight of Wildcat Island on the Peak of Darien. So here is the first of our Horseshoe Coves. This is one of the places that I was shown when I was much younger, and I can remember coming here and feeling a little bit disappointed by it. It just didn't fit my mental image of what I thought Horseshoe Cove looked like very well at all. But when you start to look at some of the clues, you can start to make quite a strong case for it. The first strength is its location. It is in roughly the right place towards the southern end of the lake, south of Wildcat Island and on the western shore. Does that matter? Does being in the right place really matter when we've seen how comfortable Arthur Ransome was in shifting places all the way from one end of the lake to the other? Well, I do think it should count for something. All the places that Arthur Ransome gave away by name were in roughly the right place, and there's no reason to think that he really was in the habit of moving places around unless he had a good reason for doing so. Another strength of this little Horseshoe Cove is this little headland behind me. In Swallows and Amazons, no headlands are mentioned in the description of Horseshoe Cove, but in Swallowdale it is described as being shut in between two rocky headlands. This little cove only has one, but this is where the illustrations come back in again. If we look at the illustrations of Horseshoe Cove by both Arthur Ransome and Clifford Webb, the headlands in them do look quite a lot like this little headland. But I suppose you could say that one Lake District little headland is very much like another. Another strength for this Horseshoe Cove is the fact that it has a beck running down into it. You can't see it very well from here, but it just comes out amongst those reeds over there. Very few contenders for Horseshoe Cove actually do have a beck running into them. And on top of that, there's what you discover if you explore the beck, follow it upstream. Before long you do come to a road. If you cross that road and continue to follow the beck up the hillside, you come to a waterfall. And if you climb the waterfall, at the top of that, you find a little rocky gully with more waterfalls at the top. Swallowdale, I hear you shout. Well, possibly. The truth is that on first glance, that Swallowdale is possibly even more disappointing than this Horseshoe Cove might be. But it is there in roughly the right place and linked by a beck to this Horseshoe Cove. So if it is just a coincidence, then it is a very good coincidence. The last reason is the fact that this is such a very, very nice place to come. The lake's very high at the moment, but when the lake's a little bit more lower, where it has normally been on our summer holidays, there is a lovely little beach to sit on, and it's easy to imagine the Ransome family rowing over here from Nibthwaite and picnicking on the beach, and then the Ransome parents may be settling down to a spot of fishing and sketching, while the younger Ransomes splash about in the water, go for a swim, maybe scramble on the rocks of that headland, explore the woods, or maybe even follow the beck upstream to find what they can find. I hope to be able to show you that Swallowdale a bit later on in the video, but first of all, there's a bit more to see on the lake. Beckfoot, like the Peak of Darien, is one of those places which there are several contenders but no clear winner. Lanehead, up at the northern end of Coniston, has been put forward as one possibility from the fact that Arthur Ransome knew it very well, stayed there with a Lake District family of whom the oldest two daughters were Barbara and Dora and Barbara Collingwood, who might have given part of their characters to the Amazons. Arthur Ransome must have seen lots of Beckfoot type goings on there, such as cook preparing pies and cakes and grog for adventures on the lake, and the banging of the dinner gong, and possibly even painters and decorators coming in. But for a closer physical match, some of these houses along the western shore at the southern end of Coniston do pretty well. Brown How is just over there, which was the choice of the 1974 filmmakers, and my favourite. It's a little bit distant from here, but it's up the lake, close to Sunnybank, where we stay. Is I think it's called Oxon House, and I particularly like it because, like Brown How, it has a lovely lawn, but it's also it has a little bit of a promontory next to it with a flagpole, and it's right next to a pretty decent river. The river in that case is Torverbeck. So this is our second Horseshoe Cove. I know I'm not the first person to stand here and admire this place's Horseshoe Cove-like qualities, but when I came across it on a paddle around the southern end of the lake this time last year, I hadn't seen it suggested by anybody as a possible Horseshoe Cove. So in a way, I like to count it as my own discovery. The thing that drew my attention to it was last year, in this spot exactly, I came across a rock which struck me as quite a hazardous navigation. I was a little bit surprised it wasn't marked in any way. And that made me think of hazardous navigation from the books. The most famous of all, of course, is Pike Rock. It's completely invisible now. The lake is, well, I thought at least a foot, but maybe it's more than a foot higher than it was around about this time last year. And it's a little bit eerie knowing that it's somewhere very, very close to me, but I can't see it at all. But it did strike me as a very good pike rock, just about the right distance off that headland there. And the depth of the water, you could see the bottom of the lake at the bottom of that pike rock this time last year. Was about the right depth for, well, I won't say anything else in case there's anybody watching this video who hasn't yet read Swallowdale, but let's just say the water was about the right depth. As for the rest of this Horseshoe Cove, shut in between two headlands, it's nice and secluded. I think it makes an excellent Horseshoe Cove. There is no beck running down into it, and I suppose possibly you could say it's a little bit small, but in many ways it's my favourite. The next Horseshoe Cove is literally the very next bay round. The two bays share the same headland. This one is much bigger, possibly a little bit too big, if the one we've just seen was a little bit too small. This one has been suggested by one of the more recent Arthur Ransome explorers, John Sparks, who has published a book, I think it's called Exploring Arthur Ransome's Lake District, but I will make sure I get that title right in the description if I haven't already. It's a little bit too big for my liking. There is a pike rock on this around this Horseshoe Cove as well, and with the lake being so high, it might be really good conditions for this pike rock, because when the lake is low, that pike rock is form part of the shore rather than being actually out in the lake. So maybe Arthur Ransome locations kind of come and go with the seasons, with the raising and lowering of the lake. They can hide and reveal themselves. It's worth coming here more than once. So here is the other end of that large Horseshoe Cove. Here's the northernmost headland, and well, the northernmost headland makes another kind of Horseshoe Cove in miniature, and there's a little pike rock possibility on the just off that furthest headland north. It's all on this. In this one, I think it really is far too small, much too miniature. But anyway, it's there are so many little bays and headlands around here, it's impossible to pin any one of them down to being the Horseshoe Cove, but one thing we can be completely sure of is that Arthur Ransome saw them all. Right, just around the corner over there is Peel Island. Let's go there. So here we are in the Secret Harbour. In this hallowed place there is no need for detective work. This is the Secret Harbour, pure and simple, 100%, and you can just simply soak up being immersed in Swallows and Amazons country. If you're lucky enough to find it deserted, as it is this morning, then it's easy to imagine that the Swallows and Amazons might have left it only 5 minutes ago. Is it completely identical to how it is in the books? Well, I don't think it is completely the same. I think for the purpose of having leading marks, which would of course then become leading lights, Arthur Ransome needs to add in a few more rocks to make a bit more of a maze that the boats would have to navigate through. The rocks around here are a little bit too few and maybe a little bit too orderly. To come into the Secret Harbour, you just need to stay reasonably close to this rock on the right hand side as you come in, and then gently work your way over towards wherever the beach happens to be at the time. At the moment, with the lake being so high, you can go all the way up to that little beach just up there. I think the lake is possibly 1.5 feet deeper than it was this time last year. Everything is quite different. Does it matter if it's not completely identical? Well, no, it doesn't. As I say, this is the Secret Harbour. But as we are being detectives today, I have a feeling that if Dick and Dorothea were with us, they'd be saying something like, we can use the fact that we know this is the Secret Harbour, that Arthur Ransome told us that, to see if any other differences between the real place and the fictional one might tell us something about the relationship that Arthur Ransome intended his fictional world to have with the real world. Can all the differences be explained easily? Is it as identical as it could possibly be, given the need to possibly add in a few more rocks? Well, last winter, when I was having a little think about how I might make this video, I decided to have a look into that, and I assembled as much evidence as I could, photos, maps, drawings, descriptions, to see if I could spot any differences there might be between the real Secret Harbour here on Peel Island and the fictional one on Wildcat Island. So, Wildcat Island, Secret Harbour versus Peel Island. I've got two maps here for starters. This map of Wildcat Island drawn by Arthur Ransome, and this particular one coloured in by yours truly some decades ago. And this map or diagram from W.G. Collingwood's book Thorstein of the Mere, which appears to be an accurate map of Peel Island down to the last small to medium-sized rock. You can see the extra rocks dotted around the Secret Harbour on Wildcat Island that we've already spoken about, making the entrance to the Secret Harbour more complicated. But the differences don't seem to stop there. If we look at the actual shape of the harbour itself on Wildcat Island against the one on Peel Island, the shape is different, the location is slightly different. There do seem to be more differences between Wildcat Island's harbour and Peel Island's than are strictly necessary. One explanation for that could be that this perhaps isn't exactly what Arthur Ransome wanted the harbour on Wildcat Island to look like. The first published map of Wildcat Island was drawn by Stephen Spurrier, and here it is. And as you can see, it's almost an exact match to Arthur Ransome's map, so maybe Arthur Ransome simply felt obliged to copy Stephen Spurrier's map as it was and leave Wildcat Island unchanged. But I'm not convinced by that idea for two reasons. One is that I think Arthur Ransome would, if he'd wanted his island to look more like Peel Island, he would have taken the opportunity in making his own maps to at least tweak it a little bit. And the other reason, I think, is that it's unlikely, in my opinion, that this map of Stephen Spurrier's is purely from his own imagination, having read the text. What seems far more probable to me is that Arthur Ransome would have made a sketch map for him of what he wanted Wildcat Island to look like, and Stephen Spurrier would simply have added the professional artist's finishing touches. So I think that this map of Wildcat Island is pretty much exactly what Arthur Ransome wanted it to look like. So what about the illustrations? Here is Arthur Ransome's illustration of the Secret Harbour, and for comparison, this photo of Sea Bear in Peel Island's harbour. There are some similarities you can see straight away. This line of hills in the background looks very similar in both the picture and the illustration and the photo. And this bush on the left-hand side looks very similar to this bush on the left-hand side of Arthur Ransome's drawing. And even these rocks in the lake, although there are more, as we've said, in Wildcat Island's harbour, they don't look dissimilar to these ones off the southern end of Peel Island's harbour as well. The biggest puzzle for me from Arthur Ransome's drawing is these three lines of overlapping rocks on the right-hand side that doesn't seem to really match anything from this photo. There are no overlapping lines on the right-hand side in real life. There may be on the left-hand side, but only two lines, and they don't really look that similar to Arthur Ransome's three rocks on the right. So what could be the reason behind that difference? One explanation could be simply that he wasn't in the Lake District when he made this drawing. He was down in Suffolk, so perhaps he was just trying to draw it as best he could from his memory. But I'm not convinced about that. He knew the place like the back of his hand, and he must have had photos, and if he didn't have photos, he would certainly have had Clifford Webb's drawing to go on, which, as we shall see, looks much more similar to Peel Island. Here's Clifford Webb's drawing of the Secret Harbour, and as you can see it looks so similar to this photo that I took a year or two ago that I think I must have taken that photo from pretty much exactly the same spot as Clifford Webb sat in to make a sketch for this drawing. The big difference between this photo and his drawing is this rock on the right hand side is much bigger and more covered in foliage than this rock we can just see in the background here, which is the last rock on the southwestern corner of Wildcat Island before it becomes this little tail of rocks awash, not awash, sorry, in the water. This rock here, I think, looks much more similar to this rock, which sticks right out beyond the southern end of Peel Island. The bushes on the top and the line of rocks at the bottom are almost identical, but it has been flipped around, so maybe Clifford Webb just used a little bit of artistic licence to turn that rock around and insert it into his drawing. Arthur Ransome may not have been a great artist, as he himself would freely admit, but I think he was easily competent enough to have made this drawing of Wildcat Island's Secret Harbour more closely resemble Peel Island's harbour if he'd have wanted to. So why might he not have wanted to? Well, I think he wanted to deliberately increase the separation between his fictional world and the real world, possibly even as a coded message to his fans. We know he loved a coded message. By the time he made this drawing, he'd already written Swallowdale, Winter Holiday and Pigeon Post, and perhaps he just wanted to send a message saying that yes, every single place exists somewhere, but don't go looking for the last detail. My fictional world is not supposed to be the same as the real world, it's just supposed to resemble it, and even the Secret Harbour is a little bit different. The rest of Peel Island makes a reasonable match for Wildcat Island. It has all the components it really needs. It has a camping place, which is down here in the middle of the island, and a landing place down there on the eastern side, and a good lookout point up at the northern end through those trees. It's in many ways obviously not an exact match. The camping place is not really convenient enough to the landing place. It's a little bit too high and in the middle of the island and not grassy enough, but Arthur Ransome himself said that most of Wildcat Island was Blakeholme on Windermere, and while I'm not 100% convinced that he meant that quite as strongly as he said it, I haven't yet visited Blakeholme, so I can't really comment. But as for the Secret Harbour, the one thing I didn't do back in my investigations at home was go through the actual descriptions from the book itself. So what I'm going to do now, rather than read out the description, I'm going to take a walk from the camping place here down the paths to the Secret Harbour, just like Captain John did on that first occasion when he discovered the Secret Harbour. And you can have a look at the books yourself. That description, as I say, when he discovered the Secret Harbour, or maybe the description of Titty when she's alone on the island and sits on her rock and watches the dipper, and see what differences you can see between this real Secret Harbour on Peel Island and the Secret Harbour from the books. that's the end of our paddleboarding tour. There's a bit more I want to show you around this southern end of Coniston Water, but for that I'm going to need to swap my sandals for my walking boots. So there's what I think is Oxon House, absolutely beautiful. And well, that makes a pretty decent Amazon boathouse, doesn't it? Even got barrels next to it all ready to go into Amazon and be carried up to the camp on an oar. There's the little promontory I was talking about. Imagine the Beckfoot one being on a bit more of a cliff top, but there is a promontory. There's a couple of flagpoles. And round the other side of the promontory, that's Torver Beck. And before you go too long, Torver Beck turns into a fast-flowing rocky stream. Does it make part of the Amazon River? Well, who knows? Probably. As I say, Arthur Ransome saw and knew it all. Oh look, there's Tarka. Yeah. So this is a spot where the beck up from that Horseshoe Cove crosses underneath the road, and it's just a tunnel under the road here. There's no space at all for explorers, not even tiny ones, to get underneath. That road is clear for a sec. You can just about see the bridge back there. So we shall follow this path, which runs close to the beck, up then, in search of this Swallowdale. So if I can call the Secret Harbour the crown jewel of Arthur Ransome locations, Swallowdale and Amazon's locations, then I reckon that it would be fair to call Swallowdale, the Holy Grail. Oh. Because of all the places in the Swallows and Amazons books, it's probably a close second to Wildcat Island and the Secret Harbour in terms of places that you would want to see in real life. And people are still looking for it. This one was found by Roger Wardale in the 90s, and like that Horseshoe Cove back there, on first glance it is a little bit disappointing, but there's plenty of evidence that when all put together can make quite a strong case. It's another of the places that I was shown as a youngster, and came back here to find it again 3 years ago, and it showed itself on that occasion to have another Holy Grail-like property, that of having the possibility of looking straight at it and not realising what you'd found. And that time we came up here and we walked straight across the bottom, straight through the bottom end of the Swallowdale Valley, and kept on going, not realising that we'd found it, and only realised where we'd been when we came back the other way about an hour later, having given up our search, and I spotted the lower waterfall. We had our kids with us on that day too, and it's a good job we did, because without them I think there's a feature of this particular Swallowdale which I would have completely overlooked, but which I now think is very significant indeed.
The able seaman started forward again along a sheep track that led through the heather close above the stream. The boy ate a piece of the chocolate he had saved and hurried after the able seaman. Sometimes the bracken grew so high that they could hardly see each other. Sometimes the sheep track wound down along the edge of the stream, turning this way and that around pale grey stones, and then climbed up again to twist its way among the tough clumps of purple heather. There was the stream to guide them, and now there was a new noise to draw them on. This was the noise of falling water, the same noise they had heard close beside them while they were climbing through the larchwood, but much louder now and different when heard on the open moorland instead of under the trees. "Look," said the able seaman suddenly, "there it is." They hurried on until they stood below the waterfall. Above them the water poured down noisily from ledge to ledge of rock, and they could go no farther without climbing up the rocks beside the falling water, or getting out of the long winding gully that the stream had carved for itself in the moor.
So here we are at the lower waterfall, and there is more water pouring down than I've ever seen before, and I think you probably could say that it is pouring down noisily. Every other time I've been here it has just been a trickle, so it's great to see it in a little bit of a state. So let's see what there is to see at the top.
The able seaman hesitated. This time it was the boy who wanted to go on. Before she had made up her mind, he was already climbing. A moment later, she was climbing too, and they came together to the top of the dry rocks at the side of the fall. "That was easy climbing," said the boy. "Hello." Neither of them had expected anything like what they found when they scrambled over the top. It was a little valley in the moorland, shut in by another waterfall at the head of it, not 100 yards away, and by slopes of rock and heather that rose so steeply that when the explorers looked up they could see nothing but the sky above them. In there it was as if the blue mountains did not exist. The valley might have been hung in air for all that they could see outside it, except when they turned round and looked back from the top of the waterfall they had climbed to the moorland, the woods and the hills on the other side of the lake. "It's a lovely place for brigands," said the boy. "It's just the place for Peter Duck," said the able seaman.
It's the most secret valley that ever there was in the world. So here we are, a little valley of rock and heather, shut in by waterfalls at each end. This does measure up on some counts for Swallowdale, but it does have some serious weaknesses. For a start, it may well not meet your imagination of what Swallowdale should look like very well at all, largely perhaps because of Arthur Ransome's drawing of Swallowdale, which doesn't look anything like this place. But apart from that, it's got some other rather large flaws. This rocky wall on the left-hand side is okay. It's kind of steep enough and it's quite big. But on the right-hand side, as I look downstream, well, the wall hardly exists at all. There's just a pile of boulders, really, and it doesn't close the valley in on this side. And although that side does hide the rest of the hillside, this side you can see the view right over the valley down to the lake, and it kind of spoils the impression a little bit of the valley being hung in space, which you might just about get if the rest of the valley, or the other side of the valley, matched that one. The beck is too small. It's still fairly full, but it's almost invisible, hidden among these bits of bracken and spiky grass. Not really big enough to make a washing up pool. And the valley bottom is it's wet and marshy. It's quite squelchy. It's not a very good place for a tent. It's not even particularly pleasant, really, to walk through. So what about the strengths then? Well, if you look at Clifford Webb's illustration, that does look much more like this place than Arthur Ransome's does. It has a very similar feel and look, with the sloping sides kind of merging into a sloping bottom, making more of a V-shaped cross-section to the valley. Then there's the location. As we've already mentioned, it's linked by this beck to the Horseshoe Cove down on Coniston Water, and all of it is in roughly the right place geographically in relation to the lake and Wildcat Island. And there are more bits of geographical evidence as well. A bit further up the hill is Beacon Tarn, which is a beautiful rocky peaty tarn which Arthur Ransome and the Altunian family both love to visit to swim and fish in, and really makes a perfect trout tarn. And there's the fact that this bit of, well, just over, again over that way, I think, lost my bearings slightly, but Beacon Hill is over that way as well, not far away at all. And in an early sketch map for Swallowdale, Arthur Ransome included Beacon Hill on his map by name, right next to Swallowdale. Which might all seem to be starting to make this a bit of an open and shut case. But the main issue that I have with this place is just the fact that the valley is not particularly memorable or appealing. I can't see anything really that would make Arthur Ransome remember this place from his childhood so strongly and with such affection that he would want to make it the main setting for his second book, for his sequel to Swallows and Amazons. But that question could be solved by the thing which my kids drew my attention to on our trip up here 3 years ago. While I was squelching about in this place, trying to find the best angle to make this place look like Clifford Webb's drawings of Swallowdale, they were having a lovely time just about 40 yards away over there, near to where the camera's positioned. It is another little hideout between two walls of rock, and it's much drier and more enclosed. I'll show it to you now. So I don't know if you could call this really a valley, as it slopes down at either end. It's maybe more of a saddle or a col. But unlike that Swallowdale candidate back there, this is a lovely little place to come and spend some time, and the kids really enjoyed scrambling about on these rocks, as well as sitting on the rocks here down in the valley floor among the grass, where it is much drier and sheltered, and the view from up on the rocks themselves on this side is absolutely spectacular. I can well imagine this place being memorable for Arthur Ransome after having climbed up from Horseshoe Cove, just down there, maybe with some or all of his siblings. I thought maybe this could be the reason why he remembered this little spot in the hillside. He remembered that waterfall down there, that valley with the beck running through it, and this little saddle shut in between two walls of rock as the place that he knew and loved. But then a while after that, and it might seem surprising how slowly my brain worked on this, it occurred to me that not only might this little spot be the reason that Arthur Ransome would remember this area and that Swallowdale candidate over there, but this actually could be part of Swallowdale itself. So I started to look again at some of the descriptions in the book, and again, the evidence seemed to start to stack up.
Titty handed over her chocolate and looked back down the valley and out through the V-shaped gap at the foot of it to the hills on the other side of the lake, and to other hills beyond them, hills so far away that she might have thought them clouds if the sky overhead had not been so very clear. From this upper end of the valley, she could not see the moor below the waterfall, or the woods through which they had climbed. She looked at the valley itself and its steep sides, one of them, on the right, almost a precipice of rock, with heather growing in the cracks of it, and the other, on the left, not so steep, with grass on it, bracken, and loose stones.
So you don't get that effect of hills beyond hills if you look directly to the east, as you should do, looking out of Swallowdale as it's pictured on the maps. It appears that when Arthur Ransome was imagining the valley, he had in his mind's eye a valley that was looking more in a northeasterly direction, across and up the lake at the same time, giving a much larger distance to be viewing the nearer mountains from the hills on the other side of the lake, so that the much larger mountains towards the centre of the Lake District are in view beyond them. So descriptions of the rocky sides and the view out of the end of this valley really do seem to match very well. And in fact, when you combine this place and the other valley back there, you start to get most of the ingredients that you need for a decent Swallowdale. So does that mean that this place really is Swallowdale when you combine the two? Well, I'm not convinced entirely. I am convinced that this is where Arthur Ransome came, or this is somewhere that Arthur Ransome came as a child and remembered, and it formed part of his imagination for creating Swallowdale. And I'm also convinced that this is where he brought Clifford Webb for his illustrations. But that doesn't mean that this is the only Swallowdale or anything like it. This might just be that this is the most convenient place that Arthur Ransome could show Clifford Webb on his trips down here. Maybe there's somewhere that's much further away, much further from the road, much less accessible that Arthur Ransome wouldn't show to a mere illustrator.
Happily, I had heard of just such a place, and a couple of days later I set out to try and find it.
It's just coming up to about 8 o'clock in the evening. The kids have just gone to bed, and I am out on a mission to try and find a second Swallowdale in that Ashgill Beck, one recommended again by John Sparks's book. And well, I haven't got long. I'm gonna have to hurry. But this is one of the great things I think about the Arthur Ransome Trail, Swallowdale Amazons Trail. It makes for a walk with a purpose. if it wasn't for this, I probably wouldn't be out on this walk this evening, and it's a lovely evening. So I might find Swallowdale, I might not. Ooh. I think it's going to have been worth coming out anyway. The other great thing about all this is, as well as it being a walk with a purpose, it's a walk for a purpose off the beaten track. When you come out on the Ransome Trail, it does take you to some some lesser known bits of the Lake District. The big mountains, the Wainwrights, well, they're brilliant too, but in a slightly different way. Bagging the Ransomes, if you like, definitely takes you to some places just a little bit more quirky. And this is a bank holiday weekend. And it's Blouth Common or Brock Barrow. You often don't see anybody when you're out trying to track down the swallows and amazons places, and it's still the Lake District. It's still absolutely stunning.
What about that? A wet knickerbocker breaker? This is a lovely beck, going past the quarry, snaking away up there to that waterfall. The beck is just the right size, and the Swallowdale can't be far away now.
Two becks. So which one to follow? That's the question. At the moment, they are so close to each other, I can follow both of them. And I'm hoping that I'm going to find Swallowdale before I have to make a decision, because I don't have a huge amount of time left. Erring towards the one on the right. It just looks like it's going a slightly more promising direction, but they are starting to diverge. There's the right hand one. Found it, I think. I'm pretty sure this must be it. I took a screenshot of the page of the book before I went up here, but only with the directions on, not the one with the actual photo of the valley. But this has to be it, and if it's not, then well, I won't find it, because I really have to go back down in a moment. But yeah, here it is. It is wild up here. It's taken me about I think about 45 minutes to come up here at a pretty fair stomp. Probably a little bit too far for Titty and Roger from anywhere near the lake, and starting at Torber's not really all that near the lake anyway. But that's splitting hairs. The question really, I think, is what do you want from your Swallowdales? This beck is fantastic. It is exactly, I would say, the right size. Given that it's everywhere in the Lake District is fairly wet at the moment, this beck has probably got a bit more water than it would on average in the height of summer. But there are some good pools for having a splash and a wash up in. It's lovely and sheltered, it's green, it's got dry patches, there's nowhere obvious to pitch tents, but you could pitch a tent here somewhere, I think, if you were desperate. It's, I guess the only question is, did Arthur Ransome come up here?
If he did, then I would say definitely yes, this is part of Swallowdale, because everywhere around here is potentially part of everywhere in the books. And a place as lovely as this definitely would have formed part of Arthur Ransome's imagination for Swallowdale, if, as I say, he did come up here. And unlike the Swallowdale in Blouth Common, there's no pictorial evidence particularly to say that he did come up here, other than this being a better match for his own drawing, I would say, than the Clifford Webb one. But I'd say it's not close enough to prove anything. But Arthur Ransome was up here, well, for so much time that there's no reason at all to think that he wouldn't have come up here. I think it is more likely than not that he would have done. In which case, then, yeah, this is part of Swallowdale. And as John Sparks says in his books, this has got more of a feel of Swallowdale. I think it's easier to imagine yourself in Swallowdale here than it is in Blouth Common in lots of ways. The wild moorland, the good-sized beck, the steep sides. Waterfall at the top, maybe? I'll just go up to the top to see what there is. As Titty would say, it is a gorgeous place. I looked up the other way. I don't know if you can see that. I think there might be some weather on the way. Better get down quick. Swallowdale is just hidden away in that little bit of moor there. Really pretty well hidden. And there, the summit of Kanchenjunga. And there's the lake. And the sea. So this is very near the top of Brock Barrow. Swainson's farm, where Arthur Ransome used to stay as a boy, is just down there, and he must have come up here dozens of times, both as a boy and as an adult. From up here you can see many of the places we visited in this video. Just down there is the Swainson's boathouse. Right next to the mouth of the Amazon River. And just turn a little bit further to the south and follow the river along. There is Octopus Lagoon. Maybe there were a few more octopuses in Arthur Ransome's day. If we swing back up to the north, there's our first Horseshoe Cove. Looking quite a bit more horseshoe-like from up here. And then going up the hillside,
bit trickier to pinpoint, but there are the rocks of that first Swallowdale. Continuing to pan round to the north, somewhere in those moors is the second Swallowdale. And round here, the magnificent slopes of Kanchenjunga. Beyond Kanchenjunga, copper mines, high tops. Right up almost to the very head of the lake. And just down here, just in sight, peeking out behind those horseshoe coves on the eastern side of the lake, Wildcat Island, or Peel Island. Somewhere on these slopes are his very own knickerbocker breaker, on which he used to break his knickerbockers to have them then darned by Mrs. Swainson down at the farm. Also up here is a long boat-shaped section of rocks which didn't find its way into the books, but was Arthur Ransome's gondola. He would sit on there and pretend to be steering gondola, and also wave to the real gondola as it called in at the very foot of the lake. This area has been suggested as possibly high Greenland from winter holiday, although there is a bit of an absence of crags for crag-fast sheep. Some people have suggested a better Greenland is actually the Swallowdale moor over on the other side, and this moorland has more of a feel of Swallowdale's moorland, although there is no Swallowdale up here. So, will the search ever end? Will all the places ever be found? Is there a perfect Swallowdale? Well, that all seems very unlikely now. People have been searching too hard for Swallowdale for too long, although one possibility is that with some of the woods on this eastern shore having grown up since Arthur Ransome's time, maybe it could be hidden in there somewhere, lost among the trees, like a lost temple in the jungle. But during the course of my searches, I've been coming to the conclusion that when Arthur Ransome said that every single place exists somewhere, he only meant it very loosely. Christina Hardman, one of the pioneers of the Arthur Ransome Trail, said in her book, Arthur Ransome and Captain Flint's Trunk, that after she'd been exploring up here for just a few days, she was coming to the opinion that Arthur Ransome country was all around her, that it was more of a state of mind than an actual place. I think that's something that Arthur Ransome himself would have wholeheartedly agreed with. It's worth remembering that when he wrote Swallows and Amazons, he wasn't out scouting for locations at that time. He didn't need to. His mind had been soaking up this place for decades, for most of his life, and when he sat down at the typewriter, it all just came pouring out. He gave his children, in his books, his own version of the Lake District, and they took it and they raised it to the level of an ocean, with desert islands and pirates, Himalayan-sized mountains, and the Arctic and Antarctic at either end. Maybe it's appropriate if he gave himself a little bit of romantic imagination too, taking the real Lake District and making somewhere that was all processed by his imagination and perhaps romanticised a little bit. Also, one of the things that makes the book so appealing is that the freedom that the children are given to explore is just that little bit beyond what is really realistic in real life. As Susie Altunian said to Christina Hardman, again in that book Arthur Ransome, Captain Flint's Trunk, they are the adventures that we would have liked to have had, and maybe most children, all children, a lot of children at least, would like to have, and that is where the appeal is. They're adventures that children would really like to have, and maybe Arthur Ransome's version of the Lake District is the version that he would ideally have in real life, where all his favourite features from Coniston and Windermere are merged onto one perfect lake, and possibly some of the features are elevated just a little bit to make them even better for children to explore. There is one more clue to this, which I will share with you now, and it's from one of Arthur Ransome's replies to one of his earliest bits of fan mail. I think this was around 1932, 33, maybe even earlier, so just a year or two after Swallowdale was written. And he says, letter to Miss Simpson this is, "To tell you the real and secret truth, I wanted everybody to feel that the lake was their own lake, no matter what lake that was. Everything in the book is to be found either on Coniston or Windermere. You see, when I was a little boy, I had to spend all my holidays at Coniston, and then afterwards I got to know Windermere pretty well. So I just bagged the bits I liked best from both of them. I am very pleased indeed that you felt it might be your Ullswater. I had a letter from a little girl, very little, from Africa, who thought it must be her lake, Nyanga." So, Swallowdale and Amazon's country is supposed to be a state of mind rather than a place. I remember when I was much younger, just starting to fall in love with the books, but hadn't yet visited the Lake District. Swallowdale and Amazon's country to me was anywhere where there was a little bit of wildness and possibility for an adventure, even maybe just our back garden or the local park. I don't think Arthur Ransome wanted his readers to feel that they couldn't have adventures just because they weren't near the Lake District or even the Norfolk Broads or even around Harwich. Maybe the best thing to say is that round here is the heart of Arthur Ransome country, but Swallowdale and Amazon's country is just wherever you want it to be.